Hello and welcome to our presentation on Virginia Reads. Today we will discuss what is Virginia Reads, our reason for forming Virginia Reads, and our book titles for this year, and how you can join the upcoming next year's committees. My name is Katie Bruckert. I am an elementary school librarian at Greenbrier East Elementary, located in Fairfax, Virginia, and I'm one of the co-founders of Virginia Reads.
Thank you, Katie. My name is Amy Schroeder, and I'm the other co-founder of Virginia Reads. I'm a school librarian at Union Mill Elementary, located in Fairfax County. Virginia Reads is near and dear to our hearts, and we are proud to announce that starting in January 2021, Virginia Reads will be officially sponsored by Vassal. The Virginia Reads Awards will be presented at next year's Vassal Conference. I hope that you will come away from our presentation today with books and ideas you can start using in your schools right away.
Before we dig into what Virginia Reads is and the book titles, we want to talk about how we got there and why Virginia Reads program is so important to our schools. So let's do a little bit of a grounding activity first. My question for you is, what are your go-to books? Jot down 3 or 4 titles that you recommend to students and or staff on a regular basis. What are those books that you always are reaching for in your library to share with students and staff? Now that we've written down our favorite books to make recommendations for our students, let's do a little deeper dive into what is our makeup of our schools. So this data that I'm sharing with you is from the past US Census. And this just kind of shows you a breakdown of the diversity in the United States. Our minorities, who are foreign born, and how many different, what percentage speak another language at home. So this is the United States. Here's Virginia. As you can see, it's very comparable to the United States averages and percentage. And we can only assume with the new census data that these numbers are actually going to increase in every category. And then finally, just to show you how diverse Virginia is, we want to show you a county in Northern Virginia. And as you can see, Fairfax County, which Amy and I teach in, we're actually above the percentage of the United States and Virginia in minorities, foreign born, and students and families who speak another language at home. So what does this mean for us? Well, let's ask the question, which students see themselves in the curriculum and which students don't? I'd ask you to go back and revisit those books that are your go-to books that you love to recommend. Now, there's nothing wrong with those titles, but ask yourself, are all your students seeing themselves in those titles? Or can we do more? That's what we're here to do today, is to explore the more. Because Amy and I love exploring the why to Virginia Reads, we're going to kind of examine social studies and why we feel like diverse books is so important. So I'm going to share some wordles with you. Each wordle represents famous people that our students are exposed to over the curriculum of SOL curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade. So here we have wordles that represent our K through 12 social studies SOL historical figures mentioned by name. Again, just want to remind you, this is through kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum. So here we have representation of white Americans and Europeans that are mentioned in our curriculum. There are 93 people with 135 mentions. Here we have representation of our African American and Black historical figures. There are 25 people that are mentioned in our curriculum, 35 mentions, 5 are women. Here we have a representation of Latinx and Spanish historical figures that our students are exposed to K through 12 in the social studies SOL. 4 people, each mentioned once, none of whom are women. And finally, here is a representation of our Native peoples. We have 3 people mentioned 7 times and 3 mentions of 1 woman. So where do we go from here? So thinking about that, we have to ask ourselves, what more can we do to show representation and let our students see all experiences? I'm going to give you this quote and let you sit here and read from Dr. Ruth Sims Bishop. She says books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through an imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. So, windows, sliding glass doors, and mirrors. The power of a book, friends. So this is kind of, again, our grounding and why Amy and I created Virginia Reads and why we're so passionate about it. Another way to show you guys is that we all want to build towards inclusion. So as you can see on this scale, we really want to use inclusive books to build community. And the new term really is, instead of building diverse books, is we want to have an inclusive library where all students can see themselves. And finally, here's the breakdown of children's books. This is from 2018, and I think this has a huge impact on seeing why Virginia Reads is needed. We have a lot of our population not seeing themselves, and we want to highlight those books and raise awareness to those books that are doing that. I think the more that we share the need and desire to have diverse books, the publishers will hear that. So that is part of Virginia Reads, is help promote and share with classroom teachers and librarians across the state of Virginia the importance of diverse books. So now it's time to learn a little bit more about what Virginia Reads is and some of the book titles.
Now that you've had a chance to hear about why we need diverse books, you're probably thinking, okay, how do I go about doing that? That's where Virginia Reads comes in. Our mission is to provide educators and parents with annual lists of quality, diverse children's literature that can be used in classrooms, homes, and libraries to provide what Dr. Ruth Sims Bishop says is an opportunity to experience windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. We have two committees. The Picture Book Committee is headed up by me, Amy Schroeder, and the Middle Grades Committee is headed up by Katie Bruckert. We are accepting applications until the end of November to join our committees. You can apply at our website, www.virginiareadsbooks.com. Our committees meet virtually because the members are all from different parts of the state. It is our hope to have representation on the committees from all of the different vassal regions, so we hope you will consider applying. Virginia Reads gives out 2 awards for picture books and 2 awards for middle grade books. The first award is the Enlighten Award. We're looking for quality literature for children, unique or interesting ways of representing diversity, books that help expose readers to characters or authors of diverse backgrounds, books that provide those mirrors, windows, or sliding glass doors to children. This book stands out from the list of the 10 Virginia Reads as the best example of diversity. The second award is the Illuminate Award. Again, looking for that quality literature for children, but this is the fan favorite, the overall favorite of the list of 10 books. And this book shines as an outstanding example of children's literature. Students will vote, and librarians and teachers will send in their votes on our website. So now that you know what Virginia Reads is all about, let's get to the books. I'm going to present the 10 picture books of 2020-2021, along with activities and ideas for using the books. Then Katie Bruckert will talk about the 2020-2021 middle grade books. So the first book is Big Papa and the Time Machine by Daniel Bernstrom. Themes of courage and bravery. One of the first things you'll want to do is talk about what is a time machine with your students. And in this book, it's the first day of school, and the grandson is scared and doesn't want to go to school. So Big Papa takes his grandson to 1952 Little Rock, Arkansas, where Big Papa was leaving home to find a job. From there, they go to 1955 Chicago, where Big Papa worked on buildings high in the sky, and even though he was a little bit afraid, he knew he had to be brave. He said, "Sometimes you gotta walk with giants if you're ever gonna find out what you're made of. That's called being brave." They then traveled to 1957 Chicago, where Big Papa met Nana. And then to 1986 Chicago, where we see the grandson's mom leaves him as a baby with Big Papa and Nana, and she doesn't come back. They then finish by traveling to 1941 Arkansas, where a grown-up rips up Big Papa's schoolwork and tells him, "See this cotton and see that field? This is your school. Give up school, son. Work. That's all you're ever going to do." This book is based on stories from the author's biological grandfather, who he didn't meet until he was 18. Some suggestions to do with this book: Students could make a timeline of their life, a timeline of historical events, or they could plan their own time machine trip. The time machine in our book makes 5 stops. They could choose 5 dates in history that they'd like to visit in a time machine and write about why they would choose those 5. And of course, an overall question to ask at the end of the book is, what is the grandfather trying to teach his grandson by taking him to all these places in time? Next up, we have Bilal Cooks Daal by Aisha Saeed, who's also the author of Amal Unbound. First thing you'll want to do is talk about Daal and see if you have students that know what Daal is. Daal is also known as lentils. I've included a link to a video in the handout that you can use. And also there is a photo there on our screen. You may want to show your students what Daal actually looks like before you read the book. Bilal is excited to have his friends try his favorite food, Daal. And Daal is a dish from South Asia, and it takes time to make. Together, Bilal and his friends help his dad prepare the Daal, and then they go off to play while it cooks. Bilal is worried about whether his friends will like the finished dish. A fun activity to do with this book when you're finished is to ask students, what have you convinced someone to try? Or has someone convinced you to try something? You can also follow that up with, is it good to try new things? Why or why not? And I've included a cover of the Have I Got a Book for You because you could also use this as a springboard for persuasive writing. The Proudest Blue, A Story of Hijab and Family by Ibtihaj Muhammad. One of the first things to do is talk about the cover of this book. There are so many details from the paper boat that the little sister Faiza is in to the big head of the older sister. And of course, your students don't know that these characters are sisters yet. Every time I've read this book aloud, when I've asked students what they notice about the cover, someone is always sure to mention that hair covering or scarf on the larger head, which is a good opener to talk about hijab and the subtitle of the book, A Story of Hijab and Family. I also show this graphic of Islamic veils, and I have a link to the webpage where I got that in the handout. It's a good opener to let your students know that there are many different kinds of head coverings that they may see when they're out and about, but the one that we're going to talk about in this book is called the hijab. You can also talk about how can a color be proud. Now in this book, it's the first day of school for Faiza and her sister Asya, and it's Asya's first day to wear hijab. And Faiza is so excited. She's even thinking about the fact that she's going to wear blue for her first hijab. And right away, somebody asks her, what's on your sister's head? And as the day goes about, Faiza also experiences boys laughing and pointing at Asya on the playground. But Asya has her mom's strong words, and Asya has her friends who help her just turn away and go and play tag. So a great book. And also, the author was an Olympic fencer, so you can bring in what is fencing and talk about Ibtihaj Muhammad being the first American athlete to wear hijab in the Olympics. And also talking about how Ibtihaj Muhammad is now retired from fencing, and she and her family have actually opened up an online store that sells hijabs and other clothing. Fry Bread by Kevin Noble Maillard, law professor at Syracuse University, as well as a contributor to the New York Times. This book is a poem. Teachers and librarians, I recommend you read the author's notes pages before sharing this book with the class. There is a lot of back matter in those notes that will help enrich the experience as you read the book aloud. You might want to read this book in November around Thanksgiving time to contradict Native American stereotypes. It will help teach students that Native people are still very much around, they haven't disappeared, and that Native people can all look different. It is important to note that fry bread is not a nutritional food. It was more of a survival food in comparison to our book Bilal Cooks Daal, which is a staple food and healthy. Native people had to cook with what they had when they were forced off their land and onto reservations, and often they had federal government rations of powdered and canned food. Fry bread came about because of that. There's no one way to make fry bread. Everyone seems to have their own favorite recipe. And Kevin points out it's a special treat like birthday cake, not something you'd eat every day because it's not a healthy food. Kevin is a registered member of the Seminole Nation, and the characters in this book, the illustrator based them on Kevin and his partner, his 2 children, and their friends. When you finish this book, you could ask students, what food is special or important to your family? Could you write a poem about it? For example, pizza. You could say, in the matter of the way fry bread, everything starts out, fry bread is in this book. You could say, pizza is Saturday nights with the babysitter. Pizza is gathering at Tony's Pizza with my soccer team. Pizza is Friday lunch at school in the cafeteria, or something to that effect, and you could have a whole poetry unit based on it. So, an excellent representation for Native Americans. Soccerverse by Elizabeth Steinglass. This is a book of poetry. There are 22 poems about soccer, 13 different forms of poetry, including the ones listed on your screen. You could use this with a poetry unit. It's extremely relatable to our elementary students, many who have either tried soccer or are currently playing soccer. It's also relatable to our students who come from soccer-loving countries. The illustrations are gorgeous and very diverse. Freedom Soup by Tammy Charles. Themes of bravery and family as we watch a grandmother and her granddaughter make freedom soup or soup jumeau, pumpkin soup, together for Independence Day, celebrated on January 1st. The author's husband's grandmother, T. Gran, was the one who first introduced her to freedom soup. Soup jumeau or freedom soup is made and eaten to celebrate Haitian Independence Day. Slavery began on the island of Haiti as early as 1492 with the arrival of Christopher Columbus. The indigenous people of Haiti were forced into slavery, and by 1514, Africans were being brought to Haiti to work as slaves. The revolution started in 1791 and was the most successful slave revolution in the Western Hemisphere. The revolution lasted 12 years, and in 1803, slavery was finally abolished in Haiti, and Haiti declared its independence from France. This special book also includes a recipe for soup jumeau at the back and gives some background information. Some connections that could be made are the granddaughter and grandmother, like the grandson and grandfather in Big Papa and the Time Machine. And of course, you could use this book to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, and it also has a connection with Indigenous people in fry bread. You might also recognize another book that just came out by this author, All Because You Matter. Bread for Words by Shana Keller, picture book biography of Frederick Douglass. The theme, the power of reading. This is a good introduction into discussions of slavery because Frederick Douglass was born into slavery and then sent to Baltimore to the Y plantation when he was 6 years old. At first, the wife, Sophia, taught him his ABCs, but when her husband found out, he forbid him to teach him any more. Luckily for Frederick, he was well fed at the Alds, so he began to take bread with him when he went out. He would trade bread with the boys on the street in exchange for them teaching him words and how to read. This book ends with him learning to read. A good class lesson might be to follow up with what happened to him as an adult. Another good discussion would be, why was it illegal to teach Frederick to read and write? And what did it mean when Mr. Auld said, if you teach Freddie how to read, there will be no keeping him? Some of the phrases in this book are exact quotes from the autobiography, giving it even more punch. A Normal Pig by K. Phi Steele. Of course, you can begin this book with a discussion of what is normal? What does the word normal mean? Our main character, Pip, is from a biracial family. She has a pink parent and a black parent, and everything is going well for her until a new pig comes to school who makes fun of her lunch. She gets asked if the person watching in the stands is her babysitter. It's not, it's her mother. Her parents respond by taking her to the city where she sees many different types of pigs who speak many different languages, and she gets exposed to different types of food and learns to say, maybe it's weird for you, but not for me. I like it. So a message in standing up for yourself and the values of your family. Mixed race author K. Phi Steele, who's about to have her first baby, said, a normal pig is absolutely informed by my childhood experiences as a brown mixed race kid with a non-typical name in a mostly white rural town and my deep desire to be normal. It's also about what it was like to grow up and not fit into a category or simply be very different from the community you grew up in. You can make some connections to Jacqueline Woodson's The Day You Begin with the lunch scene, because Pip has a similar experience where someone makes fun of their lunch, connections to The Invisible Boy, and connections to The Proudest Blue about being different. Many great lessons for students in this book. The Many Colors of Harpreet Singh by Supriya Kalkar. Themes include emotions and how colors are related to emotion, and moving to a new school and having courage. In this book, Harpreet Singh wears many different patkas depending on his feelings and emotions that day, but he moves to a new school where he's feeling shy and he doesn't know anyone, and he starts to only wear his white patka. And then he finally makes a friend, and of course the colors start to change on his patka again. So many themes that you can teach here. Sikhism is a religion. It is different from Muslim religions. And there are 2 video links in the handout that you can show if your students are interested. One that explains what a Sikh is, and also how to tie a patka, which is what Harpreet wears. You can also have kids do some of these activities. For example, pick some emotions and ask students what colors match these emotions for you, or have students choose 5 colors and write which emotions they associate with those colors. And of course, hopefully they learn that more than one color may match an emotion, just like more than one emotion may match a color. Just Ask by Sonia Sotomayor and Rafael Lopez. Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes at age 7, and she turned some of her experience with what happened to her as a child into a book. The book is about facing challenges in life and asking when you see something you don't understand. So in this book, we're introduced to a character, and then we're told about their condition, whether it's stuttering or diabetes or dyslexia or being in a wheelchair, a lot of different situations. And then each page ends with a question such as, do you ever feel frustrated? Do you ever wonder if people understand you? What's helpful to you? How do you use your voice? So you could use all of these questions to have a rich classroom discussion. You could break students into groups and have each group research a different topic from the book, then create a Google slide deck for the groups to put their information, and then have them share out. And listed on there is some of the other questions that are in the book. You could also play 2 truths and a lie about each topic after the students have done some research. This book would make a good connection with the Proudest Blue, because in the Proudest Blue, a classmate asks Faiza what's on her older sister's head, versus another classmate who points and laughs at Asya instead of asking. Phew, well, that is all 10 books. Hopefully you found something that you can use in your library with your students. It's amazing how these 10 different books still have repeating themes and connections that you can make between the different books. There is an example of a pear deck here on the screen to compare and contrast, for example, Freedom Soup and Bilal Cook's Daal, but there are many, many, many connections you can make with all of these books, and I hope that you will enjoy them.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing those fantastic book titles. Those picture books are just great reads and so many wonderful ideas of how to use them in the library and in the classroom. So next up are our Virginia Reads middle grade titles. This is our first list. We're very excited about them. The committee was looking for books that had diverse characters, maybe were an own voices book, and had a student appeal to them. Those were kind of our goals when selecting these titles. And our hope was that some of these titles could be used for class read alouds or book clubs, while others could just be a great independent read for a student. And that's where we came from. And when we talked about diversity, we're not just talking about cultures, but we also talked about experiences in disability, everything. So that is what we were really looking for in our middle grade titles. And we are super proud of them and can't wait to share them with you today. So our first middle grade read is Operation Frog Effect. And this is a great book for so many reasons. It is a school story. It has multiple perspectives, and it's a realistic story about social justice. Kind of the overview of the book is that 8 students in Miss Graham's class try to understand how they can make a difference in the world. and realize that sometimes when their mistakes hurt others, they sometimes have to step up and take responsibility for what they've done and also stand together and fight for what they believe in. This is a great read aloud. Another positive about this book is there's a lot of illustrations in it too. So it can be a great entry point for some of our students who like those style books. And the other great thing about this is that it's told in 8 perspectives. So you're constantly going back and forth and seeing different thoughts, points of view, and sides to events. It's a great book for discussions for class. So that is Operation Frog Effect. Our next book is Other Words from Home. This is a beautiful novel in verse. Jude never thought she'd be leaving her beloved older brother and father behind, all the way across the ocean away from Syria. But when things in her hometown start to become violent, Jude and her mother are sent to live in Cincinnati with relatives. At first, everything in America seems too fast and too loud. The American movies that Jude has always loved haven't quite prepared her for starting school in the United States. And her new label of Middle Eastern, an identity she's never known before. But this life also brings unexpected surprises. There are new friends, a whole new family, and a school musical that Jude might just try out for. So maybe America, too, is a place where Jude can be seen as who she really is. This is Other Words for Home. Our next title, Count Me In. Count Me In is about Karina, who would have never imagined becoming friends with the boy next door. After all, they've avoided each other for years, and she assumes Chris is just like all the other boys he hangs out with, who she labels a pack of hyenas. Then Karina's grandfather starts to tutor Chris, and she discovers he's actually a nice guy. But one afternoon, something unimaginable happens. The three of them are assaulted by a stranger who targets Indian American Karina and her grandfather because how they look. Her grandfather is injured, and Karina and Chris vow not to let hate win. This is a fabulous story about social justice and racism. It offers multiple perspectives and is a great book to use as a read aloud or book club to discuss all those issues. This is Count Me In. Our next selection is The Forgotten Girl. This is a great spooky ghost story with a touch of historical fiction. On a cold winter night, Iris and her best friend Daniel sneak into a clearing in the woods to play in the freshly fallen snow. There, Iris carefully makes a perfect snow angel, only to find the crumbling gravestone of a young girl, Avery Moore, right beneath her. Immediately, strange things start to happen to Iris. She begins having vivid nightmares. She wakes up to find her bedroom window open, and she thinks she sees the shadow of a girl lurking in the woods, and she feels the pull of an abandoned grave calling her back to the clearing. Obsessed with figuring out what's going on, Iris and Daniel start to research the area for a school project, and they discover that Avery's grave is actually part of a neglected and forgotten Black cemetery, dating back to a time when white and Black people were kept separate in life and in death. As Iris and Daniel learn more about their town's past, they become determined to restore Avery's grave and finally have proper respect paid to Avery and the others buried there. But have awakened a jealous and demanding ghost, one that's not satisfied with their plans for getting recognition, one that is searching for a best friend forever, no matter the cost. This is The Forgotten Girl. Our next book is Linda Sue Park, and she does it again, friends, with Prairie Lotus. Prairie Lotus is a historical fiction story that takes place in America's heartland in the 1880s. It's a book about a girl determined to fit in and realize her dreams of getting an education, becoming a dressmaker in her father's shop, and making at least one friend. Hannah is a half Asian girl growing up in a small town in the Dakota Territory. And as Hannah moves into this territory, she has to adjust to her new surroundings and face the town people's prejudice against Asians. This is a beautiful story, Prairie Lotus. As we go through this list, each book comes up. I'm like, oh, this is my favorite book. And then the next one comes up, and I'm like, oh, this is my favorite book. But this, What Lane, was my and is my favorite book. This is definitely my go-to book this year for making book recommendations. It's very timely, and it's very accessible to the students. Anything his friends can do, Stephen should be able to do, right? So when they dare each other to sneak into an abandoned building, he doesn't think it's his lane, but he goes. Here's the thing, though. Can he do everything his friends can? Lately, he's not so sure. As a mixed kid, he feels like he's living in two worlds with different rules. And he's been noticing that strangers treat him differently than his white friends. So, what'll he do? Hold on tight as Steven swerves in and out of lanes to find out which are his and who should be with him. I absolutely adored What Lane. It's a great book. It does touch upon the Black Lives Movement in a very accessible way for our students and really shows our readers the understanding of what microaggressions are. I love this book, and it's a short and quick read, but I think it's a great book to have as a read aloud for your students, and it'll really spur a lot of great discussions. That is What Lane. Next, we have Charlie Hernandez in the League of Shadows. Charlie Hernandez has always been proud of his Latin American heritage. He loves the culture, the art, and especially the myths, thanks to his abuela stories. And even though his grandmother sometimes hinted that the tales might be more than mere myth, Charlie knows the truth. They're made up stories meant to keep little kids from misbehaving. That is until Charlie suddenly grows horns and feathers, all too similar to those described by his grandma in his favorite legend, and he's suddenly swept up into a world where the mythical beings he spent his entire life hearing about seem to be walking straight out of the pages of Hispanic folklore and into his life. And even stranger, they seem to know more about him than he knows about himself. Soon, Charlie finds himself in the middle of an ancient battle of good versus evil. With only the help of his lifelong crush and his grandmother's stories to guide him, Charlie must navigate a world where monsters rule and things he couldn't possibly imagine go bump in the night. Our next selection is Pie in the Sky. This is a funny, touching, beautiful illustrated novel. When 11-year-old Jing Wen moves to a new country, he feels like he's landed on Mars. School is torture, and making friends is impossible since he doesn't speak English, and he's often stuck looking at his extremely irritating little brother. To distract himself from the loneliness, Jing Wen daydreams about making all the cakes on the menu of Pie in the Sky, a bakery his father had planned to open before he unexpectedly passed away. The only problem is his mother has laid down one major rule. The boys are not to use the oven while she's at work. As Jing Wang and his little brother bake elaborate cakes, they'll have to cook up elaborate excuses to keep the cake making a secret from their mother. This is Pie in the Sky. If you're looking for an edge-of-your-seat, action-packed book you can't put down, Dog Driven is for you. McKenna is trying to hide her worsening eyesight and has been isolating herself for the last year. But at the request of her little sister, she's signed up for a commemorative male run race in the Canadian wilderness, a race she doesn't know if she can even see to run. Winning would mean getting her disease and her sister's national media coverage, but it would also pit McKenna and her team of 8 sled dogs against racers from across the globe for 3 days of shifting lake ice, sudden owl attacks, snow squalls, and bitterly cold nights. This is a page turner you won't be able to put down about a girl living with a disability and trying to survive in the wilderness. This is Dog Driven. And our final selection for our middle grade list is the graphic novel Awkward. Cardinal rule number 1 for surviving school: don't get noticed by mean kids. Number 2, for surviving school, seek out groups with similar interests and join them. On her first day at her new school, Peppy reminds herself of these basics, but when she trips into a quiet boy in the hall, she's already broken the first rule, and the mean kids start calling her the nerder girlfriend. How does she handle this crisis? Well, by shoving the poor kid and running away. Falling back on rule 2 and surrounding herself with new friends in the art club, Peppy still can't help feeling ashamed about the way she treated that boy. Things are already getting awkward enough between the two, but to make matters worse, he's a member of her own club's arch rival, the science club. And when the two clubs go to war, Peppy realizes that sometimes you have to break the rules to survive middle school. This is a great graphic novel about about a school story about kids trying to find their way in life. This is Awkward. We would like to thank you for joining us today as we share our Virginia Reads list. If you're interested in reaching out, feel free to email us, find us on Twitter and Instagram. And if you are interested in possibly joining one of our Virginia Reads committees, please again email us. We are looking forward to recruiting librarians across the state of Virginia to build these lists for next year. Thank you for attending and have a great day.